So what will be on the exam? Now I'm doing revision just for my portion of the exam. Jakob is going to make a video like this himself for his own portion. So there are two versions of this explanation. One is the short version. The short version is for people who have been coming to seminar and who have read my emails this year. I know that I have some students, some of you, this will be the first time you've ever heard the sound of my voice, because I know I had over 100 students in this class, and not all of my YouTube videos have that many views. So, and I know that some of my students watch my videos more than once. So that means some people are going to need more information than others. So the first version I'm going to give is the short version. And this version is dedicated to all the people who have been coming to seminar and have been listening to me and kind of know what's going on. And then the longer version, I'm going to sort of go through what you need to, what resources you need to use to prepare for this exam. Start with the short version for people who already kind of know what the deal is in this module. If you've been watching my video lectures, you know that each video segment I created in the autumn term correlated with or was paired with a question. So initially, for the first 3 weeks, I was just putting these questions on the Moodle page. And in the long version, I'll show you where those are. But then I realized that it was easier for people if I just put the question at the very beginning of each video segment. And I told everybody, the idea is you should, after the end of watching that video segment, you should answer that question. And that was a sort of way to sort of get you actively listening to the lecture. So you answered those questions each week before seminar. And I know that a lot of you did that because a lot of you came to seminar just incredibly beautifully prepared for the discussion. And so I know people were doing this, and I'm hoping that you were writing them down and actually creating a study guide, because that's what I told you to do. So I'm sure, I know for a fact that some of you did this, but I hope that quite a few of you did it. Then we discussed those questions in seminar. And so the people who, especially early on, before the difficulties of the year started sort of getting in the way of people's attendance, early on, we had significant numbers of people there, and people were really prepared and had really sort of thought through those questions and answered them before seminar. Then we discussed them in seminar. And then the idea, what I recommended that everyone do, was to go back and look at the answer that you gave before the seminar and see if you need to refine your answers. And you would refine your answers by, again, using the video. You could go back to that and watch it again if you wanted more clarification. You could use things that you learned in our seminar discussion if the points were further clarified in the course of our conversation. And then you could use your reading of the text too, because ideally you were reading the assigned reading and using that also as a kind of basis for finding material to answer these questions. So if you did all that, and I know some of you did, at least for some of the weeks, if you did those things, you now have this brilliant, amazing study guide for the autumn portion of PY111. Hopefully some of you were doing that all along the way. If you weren't, then at least hopefully you're in a good position to kind of go back and think about that now and think about how you would answer those questions now. That was the idea. So you have a study guide. Now, what I want you to do is take that study guide and think about the following 4 kind of major areas. So I want you to think about all the ways that we discussed trust mattering for knowledge. Why does trust matter for knowledge? Why is it so important? We talked about that the whole term. So there's lots of answers to that. And so I want you to kind of think pretty deeply about all the ways that trust matters for knowledge. I want you to think about filter bubbles, echo chambers, and other features of the contemporary digital media landscape, and how what we studied about the epistemic virtues and well-functioning epistemic communities can help us think about these phenomena. How can the epistemic virtues sort of help us from being vulnerable to echo chambers? How can the epistemic vices make us more vulnerable? What can we do to our social communities to combat these sorts of things? I want you to spend some time sort of thinking about the ins and outs of these phenomena and how they relate to the things we studied about being excellent knowers and belonging to virtuous epistemic communities. I also want you to spend some time thinking about how science works, We spent a couple weeks talking about why we should trust science. So I want you to sort of dedicate some time to thinking about how science works, the different theories that we studied for understanding how science works, and why the way it works gives us reasons to trust science. And finally, I want you to think about major failures of knowledge, both on an individual basis and on a collective basis, and what the causes of those failures are. And so that's something that we also talked about quite a bit in the course of the term. And finally, I want you to think about all the possible relationships between these four areas. And that's very important, right? Because if someone is helping you prepare for an exam and they don't want you to just study one of these things and say, okay, well, that's the question I'm going to answer from Birch, they'll write their exam in a way that asks you to relate these different topics to each other, right? So that means if somebody is interested in you actually learning things, like their primary interest isn't you getting a particular score on an exam, but they're interested in getting you to really think and study and learn, then they're going to set the exam up so that you can't just get away with studying only one question. How do you do that? You relate the different topics to each other in the questions that you write.